All right, if you just stand by while it streams. All right, everybody. Well, welcome. For anybody that's watching on the YouTube channel or watching the recording, you're welcome to the Grand Strand Astronomers January 2022 meeting. My name is Ian Hewitt. I'm the executive officer of the Grand Strand Astronomers. And I'd like to welcome everybody to 2022. We were hoping in 2022, our plan was originally to have in-person meetings with a virtual component. We'll always have a virtual component for those that don't want to drive up to Coastal Carolina University. Yeah, the reality is we live in a fairly spread out area, so some people don't like to drive that much at night. But that was our original plan. Of course, the return of COVID or COVID strikes back, whatever you want to call it, Omicron, has kind of put a dent in that. So this month we decided to do just a virtual meeting. Certainly hoping we can go and do one in person next month in February, but we'll have to see based on the conditions, and whether there are masks required at Coastal Carolina. Right now they have a mask mandate in place, but they said they would revisit it at the end of January. So we'll have to kind of just see what's happening there. So again, I apologize. Our intention was to fully have meetings this year, but or face-to-face meetings. We'll have a meeting every month though. So we've already gone ahead and scheduled that. Per our discussion, I guess several times last year, we kind of settled on a schedule for the meetings. And for the first half of the year, we will be meeting, the indoor meeting will be happening on the second Thursday of the month. And so that'll be constant. So you can put that on your calendar. The observing sessions, which we have scheduled out through the first 6 months of the year, occur very close to the last Saturday of the month. So I actually sent out an email with all those dates. I'll get them all entered on Facebook as well. They are also listed on the website. So we already have those locked in at Hampton Plantation. So it is a Saturday closest to the new moon or when it's pretty favorable, right? So for this month, that would be January 29th that we would have. So that's when we're scheduled to go out to Hampton Plantation. Of course, that's going to be weather permitting. Right. So, we just kind of have to watch the weather as we get close to that day. Right. If it's going to be like it's going to be this weekend, obviously we probably won't be observing. But, I encourage everybody, if you haven't come out to Hampton Plantation, to come out. It's well worth it. It's a nice dark sky site. Last time we were out there, well, the last one, we had multiple scheduled last year, but we had a real bad run of weather in the fall. But the one we had in September was, I know Gerald was there. I don't know whether Ronnie was there, but I know that Gerald can probably tell you it was actually just really great. So the conditions were really nice. So we have a couple other things that kind of wanted to mention before we get onto our main topic here. One is we also have a public event teed up right now. I do realize with COVID, we're going to have to play it by ear a little bit, but it is for the beginning of February. So things may be considerably better at that point, but we'll see. What this event is, it's at, Gerald, why don't you just say just a little bit about it, since you could probably do it a little more justice than I can.
You want me to share the little slide presentation?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, let's see. Do
you have permission to do that?
How do I do that?
All right, well, hang on. You should be able to do it now.
Okay. Do I get a indication to do that?
You don't have a share screen on your toolbar?
I'm looking. Got record. Oh, there it is. Duh. Okay. Okay, so Tuesday I went out to Play Card Environmental Learning Center. Um, Denise actually put us onto this. So thank you, Denise. That was a good find, I think. So it's located off of 410 and SC 19 to the west of Loris. There's a Google Earth map of it. This area was it's pretty well open. Um, it's a rural area. He also has this area across the highway, but we didn't go over to that area. But as far as dark sky, they're class 4, and whereas Hampton is a class 3, and where I live in Myrtle Beach, Plantation Lakes, it's a class 6. So you can see it's a couple order of magnitude darker than where I live, but we don't get the quite as dark sky as you do out at Hampton. At their facility, they have a learning center. They can do indoor class training, and they have these telescopes available for public use. And, of course, you can see, pretty good, a couple of Dobsonians. They got two Newtonians. This was set up, and there was one sitting over in the corner. And then, of course, they got a couple refractors laying around. Also, he unboxed this for me, but he said he's never set that up because he doesn't have the strength to put it up on the mount. It takes a couple of people to do that. So this is a 12-inch Cassegrain telescope. So he'd love to have somebody out that would help him set that up. That would be an interesting adventure. And also they have visual aids, that they take out, for the kids to help see what they're looking at. As you can see, the field is pretty wide open. The tree line is fairly low, so you've got a good access to the night sky. They do have a restrooms facility on site within walking distance. So it's a rural area. It's darker than Myrtle Beach, not as dark as Hampton. It's a really good facility, support learning and host public events. They target, we're targeting a public observation on Friday, February 4th. Now, they're still trying to work out the details. And of course, like Ian said, this is all weather permitting. So this will be our club joining with, a star party put on, by Play Card Learning Center. So we hope this leads to further outreach, and they also indicated they're wanting to install a small observatory. That's been on their plan, and so they're hoping to get that installed in the near future, get funding for that. Okay.
Yeah, so one of the things we wanted to explore this as a potential observing site. And one thing about Hampton Plantation is a great observing site, and we're not talking about getting rid of them at all or not doing that things there. But we were trying to look for one that's closer to the North Strand for those folks that live in the northern part of the area, right? If you live somewhere near the Southern Strand, Hampton's very convenient. I know at least on my screen, probably the right half of the screen, Hampton Plantation is pretty convenient for us. But maybe for anybody that lives on the North Strand, we'd also like to have a place. So we talked about doing a public observing there to see, to give it a test drive. So it's all part of our plan to try to find some other sites. We're not sure what kind of arrangements could be worked out for access. But, again, we'll give it a try first and see what we come up with. So watch for some more details on that as we get closer to it. Regarding, we were talking a little bit before we went live, and I thought I'll mention that the dark sky site, the IDA dark sky site process is ongoing with Hampton Plantation. We basically it kind of got interrupted with COVID a little bit. But so basically they had to kind of restart. So we've gone to the nominating committee and gotten through the first goal. There's now a series of questions that need to be answered to go forward, and they want to update some measurements and everything. And the Low Country Stargazers are working with Hampton Plantation on that, and there's a couple of us, Gerald and myself, who are sitting in on that process as well with Hampton Plantation and Low Country Stargazers. So that's moving forward. It's just quite a process with a lot of documentation and everything. So they're pretty thorough about that. So that's where we are there. The other thing is the website. For anybody looked at the website, I know it looks a little bit funky with the images and everything being cut off. I'm not really sure what happened with the website. The theme we were using apparently has gone through some changes, and no matter what I do with the images, they tend to get cut off. So what we have done is we have actually purchased a theme that we can actually completely modify. It's installed, but it's not activated yet. I actually waited because of this meeting. I didn't want to disrupt the website, but probably this weekend I will go and make some changes to the website. I made a few hacks in there to make it a little more readable, but I realized the formatting is not ideal. We fully realize that. And we're going to try to get that cleaned up here in the next probably this weekend and the next week. So hopefully you'll see some changes in that. So but again, the key things on there are the dates. The key thing on the website are the dates, of course, which the next ones would be again, to repeat that, the observing session at Hampton Plantation on January 29th, which is a Saturday, as well as the next meeting, which is the second Thursday in February. So before we move on to what we were going to talk about tonight, the main topic, does anybody have any questions? No? Awesome. Well, I thought we'd talk about powering telescopes. It's kind of interesting topic, and it's getting very important, right? So I just threw together a quick little presentation to guide the discussion, but it's not like a one-way presentation. It's more of a discussion. So anybody willing to, or anybody that wants to share anything, please do. Give me just 1 second to I have multiple screens. I need to configure my screens. I don't know. Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I just called it power to the people. So, I mean, the thing about it is, telescope power has become a thing, right? I mean, some of you still use Dobbs, and that's great. But a lot of us use go-to telescopes, at least to some degree. They need power, especially in the field. A lot of us are using cameras of various types, taking images. And then, of course, we're using computers. Whether or not you're doing imaging, some people use them for sky atlases, right? They need power. So bottom line is more and more technology out there actually needs power. And when you're at home, it's no big deal because you can either buy an AC adapter or you can buy one of these, something like this. And I'm not sure if everybody can see me. Can everybody see what I'm holding in front of me? These are, maybe I'll unshare my screen for a second. And like something like this, you can get these on Amazon. They're pretty cheap. They are, they're like controlling LED lights, but they are 12-volt DC power supplies that you plug in. The reason I like to use the LED lighting ones is most of these are outdoor rated, so they're sealed, so you won't electrocute yourself. And I think this one's, so this one's 60 watts, so it's a good 5 amps. So but you can buy them even bigger, and they're not very expensive. Of course, you can do that as well as the AC power supplies for the telescopes when you're at home, but it's a little bit different when you're out in the field, like you're somewhere like Hampton Plantation, especially if you're doing a lot of imaging. So really, the three main types that people are using, I've seen people use all three types of these out there. are traditional lead acid batteries, like a marine deep cycle or something. Then sealed batteries, most people, these like SLAs, sealed lead acid batteries. Most people use the AGM, the glass mat batteries. They're a pretty good choice. And then, as of just not too many years ago, lithium batteries are becoming more and more popular. So I would talk a little bit about that. There's actually a lot of caveats to a lot of this. Having gone through several sets of batteries and dealt with a lot of different things, I kind of learned some things as I've gone along here. But again, anybody share anything or any comments, right? So I'm not the sole expert on all this. But traditional batteries, and by that I mean just the regular lead acid batteries like car, motorcycle batteries, they're generally kind of heavy. They're not light, and they're not ridiculously heavy, but they're generally heavy, and they work great. But the ones that aren't sealed are can be a bit hazardous to transport. You do need to be careful, right? You need to be careful not to crack them, and you don't want to spill sulfuric acid on anything, especially out in the field, right? Uh, the main thing, if you're using these, is you need to get a deep cycle. The traditional car and motorcycle batteries are meant to be pretty much constantly charged. They're not really meant to be drawn down deeply, and it tends to kill those batteries. But they do make deep cycle, especially marine batteries. A lot of marine batteries are meant to be deep cycled, and that's fine. But again, generally traditional batteries are generally not the best choice. So, most people over the past few years have gone for either sealed lead acid, again, the SLA or the AGM batteries. Let's see. I thought I had one on my table here, but I don't. These are like the kind you see wheelchair batteries or something like that, or alarm systems or UPSs. Again, they don't require any maintenance, so they don't have caps, you don't put fluid in them or anything. So, and they tend to be pretty robust in terms of if you can transport. So they're actually much safer to transport and handle, right? And they're still reasonably heavy, especially for the large sizes. And if you have to get I used to have a couple of big 70 amp hour ones. I had two 70 amp hour ones, so I could go to star parties and run for like 2 nights before I needed to recharge. So but those 70 amp hour ones are they're kind of heavy. So to kind of boost those things around, right? But they do work, and they provide pretty reliable power. They're a pretty reasonable choice. But like anything else, there's actually some practical limitations with those batteries, right? One thing is shelf life. I guess what a lot of people don't realize is that an AGM battery is good for about 5 years before use. They actually have there's actually like a little barrier they set up in the batteries that keep it like healthy before the first charge, right? And then when you charge it, all of a sudden it changes in that you can't really let them sit for long periods of time without charging. You have to do maintenance charging. This is in addition to the fact that you can't really overcharge them, right? So if you get an AGM battery, you need to make sure you get a smart charger that's actually meant to charge AGM batteries, because you can't overcharge them. Overcharging can damage them very quickly. But this just kind of is a little graph I found on Full Wave Marine based on the temperature and the storage period. Thing is, when these things sit on the shelf, they will actually lose power. And what's worse is the longer they sit, it'll be harder to get that capacity back, right? So they're not meant to just sit there on the shelf. They will discharge, and if they're sitting long enough, they'll eventually just go bad. So you do have to maintain them. You kind of see it's related to temperature here for this particular vendor's battery. And you can see, like, if you're keeping them in your garage here in Myrtle Beach, it's not hard to get to 100 degrees or even at 90 degrees. You can see really after about 3 to 4, 5 months, you're down to 60% residual capacity of the battery. It really takes it out on the battery. So they're meant to be, in order to keep them in top shape, you need to keep them charged regularly, right? This is a challenge if you're not doing observing all the time. right? If you're just letting them sit for 6 months at a time, right? It's going to impact the battery, the life of the battery, the capacity of the battery will get impacted in these AGM batteries. If you continually let that happen, where you let them discharge without charging them, you all of a sudden notice that after you charge them, they don't deliver as much power. Their capacity is diminished, and that will become permanent. It's just one of those things that you have to be aware that these batteries need maintenance. Again, it's as simple as putting them on the charger, you know, periodically. I mean, you really don't want to wait 3 months. I mean, I used to throw my charger on probably once a month to make sure that I kept them up to snuff. If I observed, that was great. If I didn't, I made sure and put them on the charger, right? So that is just a challenge with the AGM batteries. It's not an overly negative thing, but it's just something to be aware of. The other thing about it is, AGM batteries are good, and they're not like automotive batteries that aren't meant to be discharged. But the problem is, the deeper you discharge the battery, the shorter the life is on these batteries. So a couple of charts here for batteries from batteriesinaflash.com and Federal Batteries down in Australia. It shows like how the cycle count drops based on how much you discharge it, right? And notice this, it's like they've got almost a 10x between 10% discharge and 100% discharge. They got almost a 10x drop. So it really takes it out of the battery if you discharge it too much. What this is important for is sizing your battery, right? If you get the battery that's just enough size that it'll last you the night, and you're discharging it down to 100%, it's going to have a lot shorter life cycle. Whereas if you're doing something at 50%, it's much better life cycle. So, you kind of need, when you're picking your size, you kind of get that feeling. And you see that this chart on the right is sort of the same. This is 100%, 50%, and 30%, right? So you can see that it really makes a big difference in how many times you can discharge it, right? So that's the other thing you kind of need to do when you're sizing up these AGM batteries for your needs, right? So that's really the deal with these AGM batteries. They're reasonably good, in terms of delivering power. But what's the newest ones are lithium. They're a lot lighter, but they're more expensive. So you could go figure, right? The AGMs are just going to be cheaper. You can get in places like Batteries Plus and everything. The thing about lithium batteries is they have a very long shelf life with no maintenance. Now I've got a couple here that are made by Celestron. Let's see, I should probably also stop sharing my screen so I can show the video. They have the power tank. This is the regular power tank. I think a power tank LT, I guess. And then the much bigger one, which is the Power Tank Pro. And these are lithium batteries. The good thing about these lithium, they have various technologies that they use to make them. You see the lithium phosphates, and there's a couple other technologies that they use, like Mach technologies that they make. The thing about these is they all have components inside of them that are smart. And one of the things that they feature is that they have very long shelf lives with no maintenance. These Celestrons are good. You can sit them on the shelf for 10 years without charging them, and they stay fresh and they hold their charge, right? And that's very common with most of the lithium batteries. As part of the reason is that they have smart components, and they're actually smart batteries. Many of you may remember way back when they first started coming out with lithium batteries, there were issues with lithium battery fires when they were charging and everything. That's why they have to have components in there to make sure that they actually, you don't overcharge them, right? You can't really overcharge them, right? You can leave them plugged in all the time if you want, but there's no reason to, since they have long shelf life, and they won't overcharge. They'll just stop charging. So the long shelf life with no maintenance is actually really convenient. They are much better for deep cycling. They tend to handle deep cycling a lot better. Now, the one thing about these lithium batteries is, one thing that makes them have a long shelf life is they will detect, they don't, one of the reasons you get the battery's discharging is there can be a little bit of current flow happening just in the battery when it's just sitting on the shelf. Lithium batteries don't allow that. They all have a low current shutoff. And that's great for having shelf life with these things. But where it's not so great is if you're using a telescope that's not drawing much power, what happens when your power supply shuts off? Even these Celestrons do it. There's a certain level below a certain current where if it falls below that current for any length of time, the power supply will shut off. So not that you have to buy Celestron. There's a lot of people make lithium power supplies, but one thing to check is when you buy one of these, is look at what the low current shutoff is and make sure that your telescope, when it's just tracking and you're not doing too much, doesn't draw below that. You'd be surprised. You may think telescopes draw an awful lot of current when they're tracking, but actually most modern mounts are pretty efficient and they don't require very much power. I mean, if you look at the power requirements, it may say, oh, it requires 2.5 or 3 amps, but that's really a max power requirement. And then usually it's fudged up a little bit just to make sure it's right. But the thing is that a lot of times they will draw much, much less than that. So it's a thing to look out for when you're buying lithium batteries. There's a lot of different vendors now that make power packs with lithium batteries that are, moderately priced. They're not cheap, but that work really well. But again, just gotta watch out for that. The thing about lithium, it's also pretty good. This is actually one from Celestron's site, is that the voltage over time tends to be a lot better. With a lot of the lead acid batteries, what happens is that as you go along over time, the voltage starts dropping and starts dropping and starts dropping. This is probably a little extreme, but it does kind of give you the idea that the lithiums tend to hold their voltage pretty close to 12 volts for as long as they can. And then when they go, they pretty much go. You can see it's almost like falling off a cliff, right? So whereas the AGMs are a much more gradual thing. It's kind of good and bad, right? With the AGMs, you can tell if you connect up something to do the voltage. Well, you can kind of see as it's starting to, you can kind of track it as it goes down. Whereas a lot of the lithiums will run right up to the edge and then stop. And this is important because one thing, if you're using batteries, one thing to note is that sometimes these mounts start misbehaving when the voltage gets low. Again, some of the early Celestrons had that, or not early, but relatively early Celestrons in terms of the ones in the 90s and early 2000s had problems with that. Is when the voltage starts dropping, they try to keep running, but certain functions start not working so well, like tracking may not work very well and things like that. Because what happens is the more sensitive components start dropping out, right? So it's one of the tricks when you're using these mounts. Sometimes people say, "Oh, my Celestron mount is terrible." It can't seem to maintain its calibration or whatever. And a lot of times the comment is, go to a bigger power supply. And I actually, when I had those big batteries, I actually gave that to somebody at a star party once to use overnight because she had a mount and she was like, it's terrible. And after that, she goes, oh, it was fantastic last night, just because to provide enough power. So it's something you just need to be aware of when you're using the mount. When you kind of look, this is a pretty cool graph from PowerSonic, talks about lithium versus AGM. And you can see these are radar charts. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with what a radar chart is, but it's something that is pretty commonly used, at least in engineering. And so basically what happens is you have all these different, if you kind of start from the center here, that's the origin point. And then if you draw a line to each of these words, that's that particular characteristic, right? And so this way for the depth of discharge, this way to high temperature discharge, this way to weight. So this kind of gives you a way to compare a bunch of things. So the distance from the origin is, how good it is, right? Like the shorter the distance is not that good. So you look at like the depth of discharge for AGM, it's pretty bad. The reason we say that is because it kills the life cycle of the battery. It's actually very high with lithium, right? That's how you read a chart like this. And you can see that lithium actually does pretty well for, like high temperature discharge, weight, because they're much light, constant power delivery, that's what we just talked about, charge time and simplicity, and things like that. Storage life is much better. Um, it's about the same for cold temperature discharge. For cold temperature charging, lithium is actually not quite as good, but again, that's not necessarily a time critical thing, cold temperature charging for astronomy, right? Some of them for high discharge rates, if you are really drawing a lot of current, some of them, sometimes lithiums are not that good, right? Or if you're trying to chain them together, they don't like to be chained together. So a couple of limitations, but most people don't try to chain these batteries. Don't try to chain batteries together. It can lead to some really weird things. So unless you really know what you're doing, I'm not sure I would recommend doing that. Buy the size battery you need. How's that? Would be my take on it. So in terms of sizing the batteries, all that you have to keep all that in mind when you size the batteries, except for when you need, right? You need to determine your power needs, and you need to make a pretty good guess of that. Now you can look at the max power by looking at the all the equipment will have power ratings, but that's going to be a max power, and that's usually calculated. They usually try to uh, when you do the digital designs and the designs of these kind of mounts or any kind of electronic equipment, you usually try to figure out the maximum power based on the components you're using and some of the factors you design. And then you usually add in a factor to make sure you're right. So the max power, it's important to know that you're not too far off the max power because, I mean, you don't want to overdraw the battery, right? Because AGM, the current will really drop. One of the things I didn't mention with lithium, I probably should have put it on here, is that a lot of times when you draw too much power, the power supply shuts down. It'll just cut itself off because it doesn't want to damage it, right? It's another thing that makes the lithium last longer is it will protect itself from being overdrawn. The AGM will just try to keep doing what you want it to do, and and then you can damage them by drawing too much power. There's lots of good. So you need to not only determine your max power, but kind of determine what your power is like when you're in normal operation, right? Like maybe when your mount's just tracking. If you're doing photography, run your setup, taking some images, run your laptop, taking some images, and while tracking, get an idea. What you can do is you can buy for very little money. They're like $20 on Amazon. You can buy various power meters like this that will basically tell you the current and the voltage, and it just goes in line with your power connections. So you can just connect it up in line and it just gives you all that data. So you can actually, a lot of people actually put these on their power supplies, their batteries, or if they're putting their batteries in a box of some sort. A lot of people buy things like especially for the lithium batteries, they buy these plastic cases you can get at Harbor Freight or whatever, and you can put the lithium batteries in there and you can mount something like this on top of it and you have like a nice little readout of the power you're getting, and it also tells you the temperature and some other cool things, right? Again, very inexpensive. It's worth it to try to get it's worth it to get a good idea of what kind of power needs you have, right? This is really important for AGM because you want to provide enough voltage. You don't want to run the AGM to the end, and you don't want to kill the life cycle on the battery, on the AGM battery. If you're buying AGM, you need to buy a little bit bigger because it will actually last longer. But you don't want to go too large. That's the challenge. For AGM, it's expensive because even if you take care of your AGM, these are not batteries that are going to last you 20 years. It's just not realistic. You may be able to get more than 5 years out of it, but you're gonna be running on borrowed time probably. So unless you get really, really large batteries and you're only drawing a little bit of current and you're maintaining them really well. For lithium, again, you want to be careful not to go too large because A, the cost, but B, you may hit the low current shutoff. If you get a really large lithium battery, it may have a low current shutoff that's a lot higher than what you might be running at. So it's kind of important to understand these numbers and at least get an idea of what they are when you're sizing your batteries. All right, saves you a lot of frustration out in the field. Trust me, nothing like having something that draws too much current. I had things like I had like a DC to AC adapter that drew too much current. When you first plugged it in, it had a huge inrush current, and I was plugging it into my lithium supplies, and it would just shut them down whenever you just plugged it in and turned it on, even though the laptop wasn't pulling that much current out of it, right? So, again, it was just one of those things that's worth kind of understanding and testing to make sure, doing it at home, nice rainy day project, so that you can, be ready, get the right size and have a frustration-free experience in the field. Um, so that was the last formal thing I had. I guess the other thing I would mention, let's see, sorry, I was hitting the wrong key. The other thing I would mention is one thing that's also commonly done and can save you a lot of frustration out in the field, is to go to like a standard type power connection, right? Most of the time when you're talking about DC power, you get these. I think everybody knows what this is. Well, let me see if I can get that right. The old cigarette lighter plug. I have to say, these are not that great. The plug itself, sometimes you have to twist it a little bit to get good contact. The sockets, most of the sockets that you can get, if you buy your own sockets to plug onto these lithium batteries or plug onto AGM batteries, if you're going to put these kind of sockets for these kind of power plug adapters, I recommend marine style because they are much more robust. A lot of the ones you get, either whether they're panel mount or whether they just are on the end of some clips or something, then yeah, they are very robust, right? They can fail. There's nothing more frustrating than trying to twist them around to get them to work while you're in the dark in the field, right? It's really very, very frustrating. They make a lot of marine panel mount ones that are a little more expensive, but that actually work really well. The other thing I don't really recommend is, and I have one, but it's not right at hand, is the little clips, the big alligator clips or the big, that you clip on the terminals of the battery. They tend to pop off. If you bump them, they tend to pop off. It's generally better to actually buy something that will actually like a connector that will fit over the battery, or if they have a screw terminal to actually connect a ring terminal to the screw terminal. It just saves you a lot of trouble out in the field. But what most people are doing now for most of the connections on, especially the DC connections, is they're going, like I showed you this, they're going to these Anderson power pole connectors. And for any of you that do amateur radio, I know that you're out there. It's very commonly used in amateur radio. So these Anderson power pole connectors, and I don't know how well you can see this, but they kind of look like this. They have a red and a black one, and they're actually mated together. You see they're actually mated together. So they only fit together one way. And what you do is you actually crimp these on with a tool, and you can either buy some inexpensive tools or you can spend a little bit more and get a decent tool, but they crimp on. And then what it kind of makes like a standard power connection. So I have them pretty much on everything. Like I have them on this DC supply here that I showed you, right? So I can connect that up with like this power meter, and then I can connect up the power meter with, this one's actually one of my telescope cables, but it's one of the ones I have that have this connector on here. But most of them, what I have done is I go a little farther in and I clip it and put some power poles on here. So then I can use, again, the power poles connect up to the telescope. Or I can actually go ahead and replace, if I want to use a cigarette light adapter, I can click them back together and use that. And it seems like a lot of work, but once you get that done, once you get that, it gives you a lot of flexibility. And the thing about these Anderson power poles is they're very reliable. They stay together, they don't slip out. They only go in one way, which is kind of handy in the dark. You can't get them wrong, and they have very good current capacity. So it's well worth doing it. You don't necessarily have to buy a tool to crimp. Again, there's people in the club, and if you know anybody who's the amateur radio operator, they probably have a crimper, and they'd be glad to crimp some for you. But maybe when we have a meeting, I can bring mine in if anybody wants to go, and we can have people buy some Anderson power pole connector kits. You can get them on Amazon.com. Maybe we'll just have a crimp party or something. We can crimp them together. But I highly recommend doing that because it just saves you a lot of time in the field, and it just makes things so much easier. I know John probably uses them quite a bit. I don't know if anybody else does. The other thing I would also recommend to be a little bit careful with, and that's why these meters are actually pretty good, is the wire size. One thing about the thing is if you use too small a wire, especially if you have pretty decent current needs, the voltage really starts dropping because the wire can't handle it. So a lot of people use very, very thin wires. It's not a great idea. So it's better to use a little bit more robust wire. That's not saying you have to have some huge thick gauge wire, probably not drawing that much current, but you may have noticed on here that these are pretty robust wires. They're not like little tiny thin wires like you see on this one, right? That's probably about the smallest you'd ever want to get. So I'm trying to get it where it doesn't cut it off. And that's probably about the smallest you'd ever want to get it when I turn to the side. But you can see this one's a lot larger when you can compare them. Sorry, I know it's kind of hard to see. It's better to go a little bit larger if you're doing your own wiring than smaller, because it will be able to handle that. So that's just another little thing. And again, if you have one of these meters, you put it fairly close to your telescope power, you can kind of tell if your cables aren't big enough or your battery's not supplying enough, because you see the current draw, but you may see the voltage really coming down, right? So that's so as you put power on more stuff, if you see the voltage start coming down, that means your power supply or your battery is not providing enough power. It's just not capable. Again, these I think this one's made by PowerWorks. These $20 things on Amazon are really worthwhile to measuring your current and getting an idea what your power needs are. And these are kind of things you can do on, like I said, a cloudy night, or a rainy night, or sometime when you want, or a full moonlit night when you want to work on your telescope. You can kind of play around with some of this stuff and get an idea. And it's actually real well worth your time, because when you get that really good clear night, you can basically just go out there and have a frustration-free experience. So it's actually well worth doing. So yeah, I don't know if anybody has any comments or questions or experiences they want to share.
So that, what'd you call the connector?
They're called Anderson power poles.
Power poles, POLES.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sure John knows all about them as well, right? Because I'm sure he probably uses them all the time.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, so I'll look those up. And the power meter looks neat. I was wanting to hook up a heater for my telescope, but I was afraid it'd draw down too much on the on the battery pack. So I was wanting to see what the heater's going to draw. So yeah, that looks good.
Right. So it's a good way to get a feel for how much you're drawing, so that you can size your power supplies accurately. There are some other things, like there are some more expensive ones, like the Pegasus, I think, makes a big power box which combines all the power together. You can power I think it's got a computer, and it powers all your dew heaters and everything, and it gives you the total current it needs. So that's like the not have to do very much way to do it. It's pretty expensive, but it works great, right? There are some solutions like that out there, but they are pretty expensive. So those may means you don't really have to calculate the power. You just provide the power they're asking for and they'll manage it. But for most people, that's not the case. You have like dew heaters, you may have a dew buster or, the Kendrick Astro controller, or I can't remember if there's another one. I think there's a dew zapper or whatever. Again, it's worth kind of doing that just to get an idea of what your power draw looks like. And again, don't forget to do the low end of the power draw either, especially if you're thinking about lithium batteries, because that's a bit of a challenge, right? You want to make sure you're not cutting off when you want to make sure you're not cutting off when the power gets too low. So it's but checking the reliability of your connections is really good. I can't tell you the number of times on my old mount or my old setup rather, I kicked out the power plug or and then all of a sudden you have to realign or something. It's quite frustrating, especially when it happens at like 1:30 in the morning. You have to restart your imaging. It's a little frustrating. But it's it's getting more important now that we're all doing so many things, and we get a lot of a lot of people are getting these CMOS imaging cameras. I see Gerald's got like a power supply.
Yeah, I bought this for my Celestron, and this is a lead acid battery, though.
Right, and there's nothing wrong with those.
Yeah, it says on the back, lead acid battery. But I've used it a few times, and it's actually held up through the night. So I used it out at the Hampton that night. I wasn't liking for power.
They work great as long as you realize you've got to keep them charged, right?
Yeah.
You can't let them sit. So again, if you maintain them,
yeah,
they work just fine. There's nothing wrong with the SL. That's a sealed lead acid battery SLAs, right? If and you just need to be honest with yourself there. If you're the kind of person that really doesn't want to do that maintenance and just wants to leave it on the shelf and grab and go on the nights you want to go observe, then lithium may be a better choice for you since it's maintenance free. But again, it's not a lot of maintenance, but you just got to try to remind yourself probably at least once a month to plug the charger in for a little bit, and then do it while you eat dinner or something, or like while you're working in your office, wait till it turns green, then unplug it. You're good to go, right? So yeah, those work. The power tank, those are the original power tanks. Yeah, they work great. Again, they're a little heavier, but they're also more cost effective.
Yeah.
Than the lithium. You will pay a premium for the lithium. So.
Yeah, that's what I use too, is the lead acid one.
Yeah, it works great. There's nothing wrong with it as long as you size it appropriately and do the maintenance. Nothing wrong with it at all. I still have a couple of the old lead acids, but they're getting very long in the tooth and they're not holding the gas like they used to. They're pretty much almost at the end of their game. So, that happens, right? Just as long as you realize it. But a lot of people buy them, try to get deals on them. You can't get deals on them. A lot of people go to ham fests, and a lot of places, a lot of ham fests. There's usually a flea market portion where people are individuals are just selling things, and a lot of people get access to like batteries they take out of UPSs or batteries they take out of lamps, emergency lighting out of buildings, which all have like lead acid batteries in them, but have to be replaced fairly regularly. Those are actually not that bad a buy, because a lot of times you can get them for like a couple of bucks a battery, and they've been used and they have to be replaced before they get too old. But you're not going to get the life you are out of a new one. But if you're only paying a couple of bucks, buy yourself, if you need 2 batteries, buy yourself like 4 of them in case you have problems, and just realize that you're probably going to replace them in 2 years, right? But that's another way some people just decide they'd rather do that and pay $10 every 2 years and get the batteries, right? And if they get 2 working ones, it works great. So that's another route people take, kind of depending on what your tolerance is for what you want to spend, and how often you want to do that. But there are places to get, those for the AGMs, places like Battery Plus, you can get AGM batteries of all sizes. It's also a good way to get a feel for the weight of the batteries. Like I said, I had a couple of 70 amp hour ones, and I know somebody who carries 2 110s. And having lifted the 70 amp hour ones, the 110s are very heavy, right? So, maybe you may be perfectly comfortable moving those around, but you need to kind of be honest with yourself, how much weight you really want to be slinging around out in the field, right? Maybe you've got, a 16-inch Meade SCT that goes on top of that tripod. It's a big field tripod that you can lift on there yourself, and those batteries would be no big deal, but maybe it'd be awful heavy. Does anybody else use anything interesting or different in their power configuration?
How you doing? This is Ben Abercrombie from Play Card Environmental Education Center. We use digital inverter generators, and we actually try to project things on the screens if possible, because we're projecting to an audience. So that's normally what we would use, but once again, it's a complicated process with gasoline and other things involved, but that seems to work pretty well in the field for us.
So we didn't talk about, thanks Ben, by the way, for joining. It's good to have you. But we didn't really talk about, I didn't really talk about that. Certainly generators and inverters are another way to go. Some people use them. They aren't too popular at a lot of star parties, because a lot of star parties have like rules about when you can run generators and hours. So, it's a bit of a, it works great for providing power if the conditions permit you using it. But like if you're somewhere like Hampton Plantation, or if you're somewhere at a lot of these star parties, some will have power, on the field, AC power that you can convert. Maybe not huge amounts that are available once you consider how shared it is, but some places, you go many places like Cherry Springs or something like that. They have nothing, and it's all what you can bring. So I was kind of focused on that, but it kind of depends on where you honestly think you'll be observing, right? If you're always observing from your house, then you got line power that you can convert, or as Ben points out, they have a setup, since they observe pretty much from that location, right? You can use an inverter, and there's like, you can buy even like the little gas powered generators you can kind of carry around, like what is the one with the Honda one or whatever. And they do work. I knew people that used to do that at our old observing site, where I used to live. There was one person that did astrophotography that had a generator. He kept in the back of his truck, and he would plug it in. So it works great. It's really kind of what you need, right? Or what you'll be using it for. So you kind of got to think a little bit about that when you do that. Again, Brian, I don't know. I saw you took yourself off mute. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say that I originally had gotten a lithium battery and was running my astrophotography setup off of it, but I was using an DSLR and no dew heater strips or anything. Once I went to the cooled, CMOS camera and started putting the dew heaters on, battery wouldn't sustain it for more than a couple hours. For the most part, I've been just running off of the AC because I'm doing it in my front driveway or whatever. But that's what I've been doing lately. I keep thinking about what I'm going to do as far as battery power, and one of the things I was thinking about doing is getting one of these Ego power stations. We use Ego, lawnmower, and these batteries that run on this power station will, also work in the lawnmower and so forth. So, I was just debating about doing something like that, and it's also usable as a emergency power for your house or whatever in case of power failure. I haven't decided to do that yet, but it was one of those things. I think it's it's a relatively small size, I think, to pick up and take with you. But as I said, I don't know how usable it would be for the, Astro arena.
Well, again, it's, if you know what the current draw is, it may work just fine, right? Again, the key is the current draw, because lithium doesn't do real well if you overtax it. And it just, but it should work, right? As long as it's got the right voltage. And again, that's probably a case of it's worth getting one of those monitors and figuring out exactly what kind of current you're drawing.
Yeah.
With your setup, right?
Haven't done that yet. And generally I'm running, with the AC, I have a separate adapter that I run the computer off of. Then I have a separate power supply that does the camera mount and so forth. So I actually use 2 to 3 different power sources, when I'm doing the imaging.
Right. And if you're using AC supplies, you can get an idea of how much power you're drawing, because you can buy those little things that you plug into the AC supplies that give you how much power is being drawn out. So, I mean, again,
I do use the Pegasus power box, and I've been really happy with that. It's mounted on the telescope and does all the power distribution and USB distribution out of this one little box. And it's got an app that you can run, and it will tell you what your power draw is, how much power is going to each port, how much current's being used by the dew strips. It's pretty, I think it's pretty nice.
yeah, it's the Pegasus, it does a great job. It's kind of an all-in-one solution. It's just a little bit I mean, it's not an inexpensive solution, but it does a great job. So I mean,
Yeah, I didn't think it was that much difference between, when I had to get a distribution piece for the dew to power the dew strip. I had to have a separate USB distribution. I'd have a different power distribution. All of that stuff was then up on the telescope, and each of them costs a fairly significant amount to get a pretty robust solution on it. So it probably wasn't as bad when you compare it to having to buy 3 to 4 components and deal with mounting those and powering each of the individual things, versus I have a one-stop solution that does all of it.
That's a good point. Again, I'm kind of approaching from the standpoint of that I kind of had a lot of that stuff already. If you don't have a lot of that stuff, or you're looking to replace all of it, then you're right. That totally changes the value proposition of the Pegasus box, right? As opposed to if you already have some of that stuff. So yeah, that makes sense. It is a great product. I will clearly say it's a great product. It's all in one solution. There's not much fiddling with it. You just, basically it's got, like I said, apps for monitoring everything, and it manages all that stuff. So it is a great product.
Yeah, and I do use PowerPole on everything.
It's
Yeah.
really the way to go. I
Yeah.
resisted for a long time. And I finally, a lot of other people did it, and I did it, and it just solves so many problems.
I do object to, I got a 740 mount, and it's still using the little 12-volt plugs that for the power, and I wish they put power poles that you plug directly onto the mount. You know, why don't they have a power pole plug on the mount so that you can just use power pole directly to the mount?
That would be fantastic. I honestly wish there were more mounts that had that option, or any
Because
mounts that had that option.
basically what I'm doing is running a pigtail from,
Yeah.
whatever the mount requires to a power pole that's 6 inches long. And so I can have the minimal, length that I can get away with for that adapter, and then everything else is power pole. And I'm typically using 12 gauge wire on everything.
Yeah, all that's well worth doing. I mean, yeah. I wish the mounts that had the power pole connectors built right in. The traditional plugs with type ends or whatever they use are not that great. Some of them actually can be secured in pretty tightly, but some of them, like on my old Losmandy, wouldn't be very secure, and you could easily bump them out. And that's about the most frustrating thing. So
Yeah, the astrophysics mount that I use, is pretty secure because it's got, a good plug that has a little twist on it that then locks it on so it won't come off of the mount. But, and of course, I think to get a replacement cable to power it is something like $130 from astrophysics. So it's something I kind of take care of because I don't want to have to replace that. But the one for the, the 740 that I got, is just like, regular power, plug you have to go into the computer or whatever, just the,
right.
and those I have knocked out before.
Yeah, I actually created a little mechanical thing to actually hold in the one on my Losmandy, and has some pressure, so kind of to hold it in, because I kept kicking it out. It's one of those little things I did, and it's some of the Celestron mounts now I know I have like the screw. We actually screw them on, which is nice. But you do need to. That's one thing that's well worth. Again, when you're on a cloudy night or a rainy night or a full moon night, you're playing with your telescope in your office or your garage. It's one of those things you can work on. If you've got a connector that tends to pop out, you can do some kind of gadget or something to try to hold it in place.
By the way, I think as far as a solution for your maintenance reminders is just to get one of these smart plugs or a power timer and just, have it turn it off and on itself, so you can set up a schedule on a smart plug anymore and just, bring up an app and set up the schedule, and it will turn it on when you want it to and run it for so many hours and turn it off.
That's actually a great suggestion. Yeah. That's the way you don't have to worry about remembering to charge the batteries.
Yeah. And plus it's not on all the time that you would be overcharging. So
yeah. A lot of the chargers are getting kind of smart too about that, but some of them, there's some that are actually designed now, some ones that say battery maintenance chargers that you can get like places like, Batteries Plus, if they're still in business, I don't know. Where they'll actually charge the battery till it gets full, and then they'll kind of go in this like slight drain mode, and then just kind of watch the battery, and as it starts to drain a little bit, then it'll charge it back up and just keep it going, like kind of this float level of charge, keep the float level of charge pretty high. And those work pretty well too. And those are designed to be plugged in all the time.
yeah, I have had a battery tender, was what it was called, for doing that on motorcycle battery when it was kind of in storage for the winter. But yeah, you can use that for any of those lead acid or AGM batteries if you wanted to.
Any of those fairly modern ones will work. But even if you've got one from the 70s or something, you probably don't want to use that battery charger. you know, uh, if you inherited one from a family member that's kind of old, right? That's probably not something you want to use. But it's definitely worth putting some time into it because there's nothing more frustrating than having a power problem. Especially if you're going to start doing any kind of photography.
Yeah, I think the power solution is going to be a deterrent for me to go to Hampton at this point because I can't run off of my battery. So I'd have to solve that before I could really expect to go out there.
Yeah, it's a challenge if you do a lot of observing from your driveway. I've done some observing from my driveway too, and that's why I had to start looking at doing some other things because I got used to doing it from there where I have plenty of power. Just
Yeah.
because I've got line power there and I can use the AC to DC supplies for all the DC stuff. Having to switch back over to batteries. I actually struggled a little bit at Hampton Plantation when I was out there in September because I kind of threw together a solution, but I really didn't do enough in advance and try it out. I had some problems with my power supplies. I still got some observing in, but I had some imaging problems. So because it just didn't have enough power and not configured properly.
Yeah,
So
I'm sure if I hung my DSLR back on it and just didn't do the cooled astronomy camera, that I probably have enough capacity to run for a number of hours. But once you throw that on, and then of course the dew heater also really saps the power. So
sure.
you do the camera cooler and the dew strips, and you need a bigger battery.
Yeah. Need more power. So absolutely. So it's one of the challenges of modern observing, especially if you have a go-to. Even if you have a go-to scope, you need to worry about that. So, or any kind of tracking scope. Even if you have on your dot, you can have a Dob, and your Dobs have tracking and go-to on them as well. So if you've got that, you need to worry about the power. So yeah, it's just it's one of the things that the more technology we inject into the sport or the hobby, the more you need to kind of keep up with that. So well, that was some good. That was some good information for everybody.
The other solution, I think, for power is to buy one of the electric Ford F-150s that you're supposed to be able to use it as an emergency power supply. So you just drive the truck there with your electric truck there to the observing site, and then plug all your adapters, into the truck and run it for the night, and
It's a
you're set.
right. It's a pricey solution.
I think it's only $50,000 or
works.
$60,000
Yeah.
solution, or maybe it's 100,000. I forget, but it would work.
We do have a club member that has one of the trucks that has the power supply in the back, and so he actually was powering it. Hampton Plantation was actually powering his setup off his truck, so it does work. Yes, but it's definitely very convenient, plenty of power, but it's not the most cost-effective way to go, unless you happen to already own that truck.
So I will say, after we drove down there in our car and drove in the entrance, we decided that we probably would need a SUV or something with more clearance to get in and out of the plantation.
Yeah, that the road is yeah, and when you first drive in, you want to be a little careful about that.
Yeah. We were plowing our way a little bit in the sand with our low slung Prius.
It's actually not. It's not too soft. That's a good thing. But yeah, you're right. There are some ruts and some high spots. So
Yeah.
you want a little bit of clearance. But it's definitely Hampton Plantation definitely is a good place to observe. So in terms of darkness. So again, especially for those people on the south part of the Strand, right? So Does anybody have anything else well, I mean, either related to this discussion or just in general, astro kind of things they want to talk about? There's Ben's dog.
Yeah, this is Nash. He's taking a nap tonight.
I was gonna say we riveted by the discussion,
Yeah. Hey guys, if you want to come out and use the Play Card Center for observing, go ahead. You're more than welcome to do that. It's a neat site. It's got real solid footing. It's got easy drive in and out access, and it's got a dark sky. So if you want to come out there and use it, it's a resource for you. So I know you're using Hampton Plantation. If you guys are up on the northeast end of the county, near the North Carolina line, you can use the Play Card site. We're about 25 minutes at a high traffic rate from Coastal Carolina University. That's about where we are in the county. So depending on where you want to use them for, it'd be a great place for a star party. So come on out sometime.
Yeah, no, we certainly want to do that. I mean, as you know, we do things with Hampton Plantation, but that's a little harder for our members that don't live in the southern part of the Strand, right? Like if you live in the South Strand, right? Like we have people in Georgetown, Polly's Island, right? Hampton Plantation's pretty close, but we have a lot of people who also live. We have people who live in the northern part, right? So that would be terrific, and definitely want to try to get out there. We have the thing scheduled on February 4th. Right. So to do
sure.
Yeah. Yeah, actually we'd like to get out there and do some observing. I'd also like to, let me, if you would stay on for a second, I'm going to go ahead and stop the live stream. And I thank everybody that's watching on the live stream, and we'll actually go, let's see, I'm going to stop the live stream.